Lex is asking, I've always wondered why the dashboard isn't separate from the rest of the... What? I can already... Just started reading all of these silly things. I'm just gonna read the whole thing first. I've always wondered why the dashboard isn't separate from the rest of the world, and with the latest mesh transfer update, it seems to be even more negatively affected by whatever is going on in an instance, preventing interacting entirely. That's not to say it isn't better than completely freezing as previously, which is appreciated. Specifically though, I'm not sure why meshes that are already rendering completely fine have to be completely freeze and reload themselves when joining a new world. Are they being re-uploaded despite not changing? That's not to mention accessibility issues with Dash becoming obscured by word entities or floating point errors when the user is far away from origin. With upcoming multi-process architecture, will user space will be candidate for separating text and process, since it's technically its own world. In my opinion, a Dash is vital to controlling session volume, other essential functions of Resonite that the user needs for accessibility, so anything that impedes it from working is detrimental to their experience. So there's a lot in this one. So first one, like you mentioned, like you wondered why dashboard isn't separate from the rest of the world, but it actually is. Dash exists in user space, which is like isolated from the world you are in, and it's done for security reasons. So the actual, stuff that controls the Dash and what represents the Dash, it is separate from the world. It does not exist in the world you're in. And that's like, done kind of on purpose. But what is like, important distinction is like, there's a difference between, where something is and then like how it like pipes the data for rendering, because everything's rendered together. Like you have like a single renderer and like it needs to render everything together, and with the mesh upload, you need to push, like, whenever the mesh data changes, which I'll also get into in a little bit because you mentioned some things about that. Whenever the mesh data like updates, it needs to be pushed to the GPU. Problem is, especially with like, DirectX 11, with OpenGL, that, those APIs that needs to happen on the rendering thread. And it's effectively single-threaded. Like you cannot be, pushing new data to the GPU while another thread is like doing rendering with the GPU. It just ends up exploding. So even if you have like, a bunch of separate things, say, I will grab a brush. Where's the brush? Brushes. Should probably grab it at the beginning. So say like, you have like lots of like separate things, like each one of these is meshes, and say like, this is one world and this is another world. And all of these are updating, and then, actually I need to turn that towards, there we go. So say like, these are like individual meshes, they're like uploading, and they exist in separate worlds, they are separate. But the GPU, you have like your GPU here, actually, I'll do this. I cannot draw backwards, so I'm just gonna do this. So you get your GPU, and then you got, like DirectX 11. So you need to pipe your data. This all needs to go in a queue because it's being piped through the same thing. So even though, like, the Dash is it's separate from the world, the data it generates, it needs to be piped through the same interface, because that's just unfortunately how DirectX works and how the graphics APIs work. Which means any of these things, if it wants to push data in, it's gonna block the queue. Now, what we can do to help with that is, because like what happens is, like imagine we have a queue of the mesh uploads. So let's say this is the queue, and then we have like a high priority queue. So we actually have like 2 queues right now. And this is all being, uploaded, like, this is being uploaded to the GPU. So whenever stuff gets put in the queue, we have like differently sized like uploads. I'm just gonna put some here, like, like here, and here, and here. And let's say like there's a big upload here. So say the top one is the high priority queue. This is, for like your UIs and so on. So, and this is the dash, update. It pushes this in, it uploads it, and maybe there's like, another one after it. So it pushes this one, uploads it, pushes this one, uploads it while this big upload is waiting, but now this queue is free. So what happens, it queues up this upload, and this one takes a while. And in the meanwhile, as this one's kind of, going through and it's taking a bit, your Dash updates again, so it puts this here, but this one's already processing this, so it has to wait for this big upload to happen until it can, push itself again. So that's like one of the things that kind of happens where like a big upload, like once it starts, it essentially ends up like clogging up the queue for a while. And one of the things we've done is that like this uploading, it can actually render another frame in between, but it's still kind of continuing the upload. What we want to do is like sort of interweave it. So we can, kind of split this one into like smaller parts. And then as it's uploading, we can pause it. And if another upload comes in, we pause this one, we upload the, we prioritize the mesh for the Dash again, and then we continue this one. Which means it's gonna slow this one, because the bandwidth is limited here, but at least your Dash will update sooner. So that's the approach we want to take to improve the issue that we're dealing with right now. Which is also a funny thing, because this kind of happens with development, is when you optimize some things, sometimes it reveals another issues with some systems, because they were designed when that optimization didn't exist, so we didn't need that kind of behavior. And now that the behavior has changed, now we actually need that other system to change how it behaves to get rid of another issue. But it's something that is fixable. It's just needs additional work. However, you also mention, you specifically to, I'm not sure why, meshes are there and they're completely fine, have completely freeze and reel themselves when joining a new world. That's the problem, is they, I'm a little bit actually confused by the question, because you're saying they're being re-uploaded despite not changing. They are changing, that's the whole point. Your Dash is when your Dash is not responding and it's just frozen, that's because it needs to change, but the changes, are now being blocked by a bigger upload. So, the whole premise of that question is wrong. The mesh is changing to reflect the new updates, to the UI, to whatever you're doing. And those changes need to be uploaded through. So what you're seeing is, the mesh that represents the UI, whatever state it was last time, with the last upload, but to get a new UI update, it needs to update the mesh with the new state. So, that's pretty much the point is the mesh is changing. That's why. And the fact that it's frozen means that the you're seeing whatever the last state was, and to change that state, you need to upload updated version of the mesh. They're also mentioning stuff accessibility issues, for entities floating point. Those are completely separate from the mesh upload. That's a different thing. They're different problems. There are also problems we want to address in different ways. One of them for the Dash is ability, so you can toggle it to be override over everything or not override over everything. And we kind of experimented with it for a bit, but there's actually one issue if you have it render over everything that we found out. That becomes very confusing for users is when you spawn things, because imagine you're in your Dash and you spawn something. Let me actually switch this to smooth POV and also render private UI. There we go. So say you open your Dash and you spawn something, I click this, I see it in front of me. The problem is, if the Dash renders over everything, this would be blocked. I wouldn't see that I just spawned this, because this is in world, and the Dash would be rendered on top. And that kind of becomes confusing, behavior, because right now if I spawn something, I can see it right away, oh, there it is. But what happened when the Dash was rendering over everything is you would spawn things and it'll be why is this not spawning, why is it, and then you close Dash, you'll be oh, there it is. So it's one of the reasons we're probably gonna make it a toggle, so you mostly use it in emergency, if you need, if there's something really blocking you. and it's probably going to be also like semi-transparent, so you can still kind of tell, but by default we'll still have it composited with the world. Because it feels like most cases, it's fine, but there's like, few rare cases like where you need it to render over everything else, and then that way like we'll have a toggle that does render over everything else, you just press it, and now the dash is like rendering over everything else and takes priority. So it's kind of like balanced with like UI UX things and so on. And then like in floating point, that's like a whole own kind of worms, like it's not even specific to the dash. But you also mentioned with the upcoming multi-process architecture, where user space would be candidate for separating things on a process. It's actually one of the things we could do, and one of the things we're thinking about doing with the Resonite overlay, where the dash and things is actually a separate process that's running as a VR overlay, and you'd be able to run it not just over Resonite, but over other applications as well. So that might happen, I would like it to happen. It's not gonna happen as part of the initial push, because that would kind of add complexity to it, but it's very likely to happen at some point, later. Which also might help, because in some ways, that the multi-process separation helps further kind of isolate things and make them more independent of each other. It does add additional complexity, but I would like this one to happen. And it might also make neat things where you can literally be, you can use your dash in other VR applications as well. It could be, for example, in VR chat, it could still be messaging people on the Resonite, or maybe even have integrations with that. And you could even maybe use other parts of the overlay where actually you spawn something and it spawns in an overlay that's over the other application. So there's a lot of kind of potential exciting applications there. I think it kind of answers most of everything in this one.